can't think as people do. The machine is different.
What marvelous being! How gratifying! How gratifying!
All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to ask them a couple of questions, and then after the showing of Jurassic Park, they will be outside of the theater. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask them about anything that we're talking about, please feel free to approach them. They're happy to answer your questions. So we're going to start with Dale. How close are we to being able to make Jurassic Park a possibility?
Not very close at all. DNA is a very fragile molecule. It really tends to break up quickly. I mean, we can't even do it with mammoths, and they've been extinct for only about 13,000 years, let alone dinosaurs, which have been extinct for 66 million. So I don't think we're going to do that anytime soon.
All right. And what species would make a good candidate to bring back, and why?
First, I thought you'd want to avoid carnivores entirely. I just thought it wouldn't be a good idea. But then thinking about it, and maybe Harry can comment on this as well, a lot of herbivores are very picky about the plants they eat. Whereas for carnivores, meat is meat is meat. I mean, it wouldn't matter if you're feeding it beef or chicken or pork or human. So it might be easier to bring back a carnivore than an herbivore. What do you think?
Well, first let me say it would probably matter to the humans if you're...
Well, yeah.
So there would be somebody that would have some comment on that. But you're absolutely right about plant material and how picky some herbivores can be. And just coincidentally, we have kind of an analogy to what went on in Jurassic Park with Sumatran rhinos. Sumatran rhinos are a species that is highly endangered. And at one time during the mid-1980s, there was a strategy developed to bring a number of Sumatran rhinos into a managed situation so that they could be protected and ensure that they would survive the poaching onslaught and the loss of habitat that was adversely affecting their potential survival at that point. But we had very little information about Sumatran rhinos at the time. And the population now, there are less than 100, just to give you some perspective, less than 100 Sumatran rhinos alive right now. So this was a necessity. This was something that was done very quickly, and the feeling of the people that were involved was that it absolutely had to be done. So they did it somewhat in the dark, and they extrapolated from other species of rhinos that they'd worked with, which was predominantly white rhinos, black rhinos, and Indian rhinos, and they knew that there would be behavioral issues, things that dealt with social interaction and things related to reproduction. But they also assumed, too, since these were herbivores, they were surviving in a forest, it would be fairly easy to come up with a diet for them. And with diets for exotics, often we base them on what we know about domestic animals, horses and cows, and extrapolate from there. But the first 7 Sumatran rhinos that were brought to North America, and at the same time there were Sumatran rhinos that were moved into managed situations in range countries, so it was a little bit easier to deal with. But when they brought them to North America, they did very poorly. And out of those 7 that came in very short order, there were only 2 that were left. And it turned out that what we needed to be doing, and this had never occurred to anyone, and someone down at the Cincinnati Zoo, actually, a fellow that was a friend of mine, gave this a shot. I have no idea why he did this, but he tried to feed them ficus. And if you have ficus plants, imagine eating a ficus plant. It's not going to come across as very palatable. You would not expect that herbivores would be routinely eating it. But the last 2 Sumatran rhinos that were in the States at that time, one was from Los Angeles, one was from Cincinnati. They'd moved them to Cincinnati. And these animals that were starting to show indications that they were doing poorly began to thrive almost overnight. It was a shot in the dark, but it turned out to be the right thing to do. You don't often stumble across things like that. You don't always get that lucky when you have critical situations that are developing to accidentally do the right thing. You hope that happens, but it usually doesn't, unfortunately.
Thank you. You kind of answered the question that I had for you. But when bringing a new species into a park, what are some things you need to take into consideration?
Well, there would be diet. Well, you know what? I'll just go ahead and use Sumatran rhinos as an example then, because I've alluded to the behavioral issues. And the fact that the people that were managing the Sumatran rhinos that were in North America and in Indonesia and Borneo at the time, they knew a little bit about white rhinos and black rhinos. And white rhinos are very, very social. They interact well, but the second generation white rhinos were not reproducing. The first generation of white rhinos that were brought into North America bred extremely well. In retrospect, it turned out that there were a lot of females that were breeding and only one male. The first 71 white rhinos that were born in the United States were all sired by the same male. So, busy animal. The females obviously were breeding well, but that shows that there was an issue, there was a deficit. And when they moved to the second generation, they were not reproducing, and they had a difficult time trying to figure out exactly why that was happening. Black rhinos spar with one another. Courtship is based on sparring. And this is an animal that is not social. They don't live in social groups. So it appears that the reason that they spar is because when a female and a male come across one another, the female has to have some tactic that she can use to keep that male present. So what typically happens if she is close to estrus or is in estrus, she will initiate sparring with the male. If she is approaching estrus, she will move in estrus much more quickly than she would in the absence of a male. They fight. That combat turns into reproductive behavior. That will continue for a couple of hours, and once that stops, the male then leaves peacefully. The female does not instigate any more sparring. Sumatran rhinos, the sparring was much, much different and was much more aggressive, and there were actually Sumatran rhinos that were being very severely injured. They have an incisor that is about that big and is razor sharp, literally razor sharp. And what they found was that when they would put two Sumatran rhinos together, they would fight viciously and they would separate them before they could reproduce. Down at Cincinnati, they put up a barrier that a female could pass through, and this is an approach that we had used similar in concept to something we'd used for black rhinos at Columbus. But they designed a situation where the female could go through this barrier. It would slow the male down enough that she could turn around and go head to head. That turned out to be a productive thing to do, and that was one of the tactics that Cincinnati used that ended up in them actually producing the only 3 Sumatran rhino calves that have been born in 120 years in North America.
All right, so I'm going to go to Dale first. If you could bring back any dinosaur for public exhibition, would you? And if you would, which one would you bring back?
I don't think I would. I don't think it'd be fair to the animal to bring back just one. But if I could bring back any dinosaur, it would be one of the sauropods, one of the big brontosaurs, just because they're so different than anything that lives today, and there's so much about them we don't know. What was their blood pressure like? What was their lungs like? How big was their heart? What was their body temperature? They're just so different from anything we know today that's what I would like to bring back more than anything else. It would be one of the brontosaurs.
All right, and same question for you, Harry.
I would succumb to the temptation rather easily. This would be something that I would be very interested in seeing occur, and in my situation, we would be looking at species that have not been gone for a very long time. Mastodons, mammoths. There are some species of rhinos that actually lived in North America that were massive, 16 feet tall at the shoulder, and perhaps even larger. The other premise that I would base this on is the idea that it's difficult to recreate a species, essentially impossible at this point, but you can recreate habitat. It's a lot easier to do. So if you go through a calculated process and you take the information that you have, and we were talking about a mastodon that was excavated in Heath, Ohio a few years ago, and they actually found stomach contents in that animal. So they could have some idea of what they would need to provide for the animal to survive. I would say give it a shot. And again, I would look at mammoths and mastodons and some of the rhino species that lived in North America and operating under the assumption that we would be doing it here. But the other thing to keep in mind as well is that with African elephants, for example, the animals are disappearing much more rapidly than the habitat is. And if you get in a situation where you have habitat that survives and the species doesn't, and the technology was present, it's your backup plan. And I think you actually, if you see that happening, you would get ready to do it. And as a matter of fact, to go back to Sumatran rhinos, now would be the time to do it because Sumatran rhinos will be gone very, very soon. And there were three subspecies of Javan rhinos 20 years ago. There is one now. We've had two subspecies of Javan rhinos that have disappeared since the turn of the century. One subspecies of black rhino that has disappeared since the turn of the century. We are aware of a number of other species of mammals that have disappeared. Some conservationists will tell you that we lose a species every 15 minutes. That might be a bit of an exaggeration, but the point is clear. We are losing them faster than we should, and if this technology can help reverse that trend, I would say give it a shot. We learn so much accidentally in the pursuit of science. I think that's another factor that you take into consideration.
Very interesting. So splicing frog DNA, do you think that... No, just kidding. Just kidding. You guys will learn all about it in a minute. So we'd like to thank our experts for coming and speaking before the film. Again, they will be here after the program, so if you have any questions that you would like to ask them relevant to the film or not, please feel free to approach them. And other than that, enjoy the film.